Claude Sonnet AI code generation for repository pattern and unit of work in C#. I want to test Claude Sonnet's quality of AI generated code for a practical implementation of the repository pattern and unit of work in entity framework. This will be on a very small project that only has 4 entities. These are product, inventory, order, and order item. Now, the repository pattern and the unit of work are very common software best practice design patterns meant to simplify data access. Instead of having logic to access a data store spread throughout the code base, this is placed into a single abstraction called the repository. Because this is a design pattern, different developers are going to have slightly different interpretations and implementations, especially given that there's a lot of, there's also the unit of work. The unit of work is meant to be the final act of committing all the changes to a data store as a single unit. So with only 4 entities, it will be easy to evaluate how well Claude Sonnet understands the design pattern. I'm expecting no issues since this is a fairly routine task. And this is the sort of tasks that should be given to any AI, and AI should be able to very quickly churn out multiple repetitive repositories for even a large system. So let's say we have a big application with 50 entities. AI should be able to do this very, very, very quickly. So a developer should almost outsource or delegate this task. But the main catch is that the AI generated code has to be of a very good standard, and a developer mustn't be stuck fixing small issues because Claude Sonnet has a limited grasp of the design pattern. So my expectations are pretty high even before we get started. I'm expecting not just the code churn, but a relatively good quality. Now, okay, here's the generated code. Reviewing the code, starting off with the high-level abstractions, I repository of T and the unit of work interface. The generic repository is good enough and usable. It has all the methods. Also, the unit of work abstraction, only a very first look, it seems okay. Now, the concrete implementations in EF, in Entity Framework 6, not the later Entity Framework core, just quickly glancing through this implementation, it seems okay. The unit of work has some slight issues though, and this is where the practicality of implementing a design pattern becomes very opinionated. So different developers are going to have different strong views. For me, the first issue that stands out is that the unit of work owns all the repositories. It controls their lifetime, it instantiates them, it controls their scope. And ideally, these should be passed into the constructor as a dependency injection. And then another little preference issue, the repositories should be clearly named, the naming of the repositories in this unit of work. It should be clear that these are repositories. For example, products. Products could be easily misunderstood for a collection of entities. Instead, it should be something like product repository. When it comes to actually using the unit of work, Claude creates yet another layer on top of the unit of work. It calls these classes, it calls them generic, it just uses the name, generic name service. But these are, it's not quite clear whether these are still data access or whether there's going to be more logic that can be added to these services. Now, my opinionated issue, all the services are indirectly coupled to each other via the unit of work, because the unit of work knows about all the repositories. It's almost like a God object, and now all the services are coupled. For example, it's technically possible for the product service to call the orders repository via the unit of work. Also the other way around. So basically any service can access any repository. So it's not quite clear if this is intentional or if this is a mistake or if there has to be better encapsulation. And this can become very ambiguous when the application starts to become very large given that there are going to be many more repositories and there needs to be better control, scope, or encapsulation. Another issue that will happen as the system grows, there will be the need for more data access methods. So there will be more queries beyond just the generic get all or get by ID. And now the question is, where would this logic go? Does a developer simply add more methods in the lower level repositories? In other words, as it stands, this implementation will work because Claude was only given specific prompt with the 4 entities. But this code is not going to scale very well when there are more and more entities added. Overall, this implementation is good enough, but a developer must always keep in mind that the code base is always going to grow in the future when using AI code generation tools such as Claude Sonnet to churn out large chunks of repositories.